Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Pianist Academy. I am Charles Szczepanek, and Happy New Year. Happy 2024. It's great to see everybody. We've got a handful of people here already. I see Bachward's Fellow chimed in the chat, probably, I think, way before this started. I hope you're still here, Bachward's Fellow. And Jess, welcome, Jess. Everybody else that's here that hasn't said hello, please drop a line in the chat so we can all say hi. As always, like we like to do, let us know where you're tuning in from. Dith is here. Wonderful. Dith, we're going to hear you play today. We've got a really, I think, cool class today, if I call it a class. Sure. Two people. Oh, Ser Woolsley's here also. Good morning. So we're going to hear from Dith today, and we're going to hear from Ser Woolsley as well. Bethany, welcome, Bethany, says tuning in from muddy New Hampshire. I'm coming to you from Colorado Springs. In case this is your first time here or haven't been here very often, we're going to have quite the cold spell in a few days. It's going to be, I think, the coldest low is going to be about minus 13, which is not very normal for us, but, you know. Bachward's Fellow, hello. Jan, hello. Awesome. Well, Happy New Year to everybody. I apologize for not having a second stream in December, just with the holiday, and I was doing a little performing, and just the scheduling did not work out very well to do two in December. So it's been a month since our last stream. Val, welcome, Val. And so thanks for everybody for being here. We're going to start today with two submissions from viewers. We're going to listen to them play. We're going to talk a little bit about what they're working on. So one piece of video game music that we're going to start with by Dith. And then we're going to jump into some Bach. So that'll be lovely. Welcome, OCD King. Good to see you. So why don't we just jump in and get started? So we are listening. We're going to start today listening to Dith play to Zanarkand. This is from a Final Fantasy, a video game, Dith? Can you let us know that? It's by composer Uematsu. And hello, Christopher. Happy New Year. Dith says yes. And Ser Woolsley, just to quickly answer your question, yeah, I was giving I know how much you love Christmas music, Ser Woolsley. I was giving a Christmas program, holiday-themed program. I played a couple other things on there. But that was December. Okay, sweet. Well, let's jump in. I'm going to pull Dith's video up. We're going to take a listen and then talk about it. Here we go. All right, lovely, Dith. Nice work. Let's give Dith a round of applause in the chat. Really, really fun music. I'm a big fan of all kinds of music, video game music. I love playing it. In fact, I've even performed in like a classical setting. I've performed music from Skyrim a couple times because I just love it so much and I want people to hear more of it. And Dith, that's a great thing to share. Thanks for sharing that. You say this is actually the song that made you want to learn piano in the first place. Well, that's awesome. And it's so awesome that you're actually learning it now, right? I always love when stuff like that comes together. Really, really cool. Dith, quick question for you to start us off. Are you practicing this? Is it just for fun? Because I know you recently took one of your RCM exams a couple months ago, right? And so is this one just for fun, just to dive in and enjoy playing? Or are you playing it for a particular competition, recital, graded exam, something like that? Let us know, because that'll affect one of the things that I'd like to talk about. So you say, just for yourself. This is a piece in between level 4 and level 5. Great. Awesome. And Ser Woolsley, see, Ser Woolsley likes the piece. It's great to share this kind of stuff with everybody. And Bethany says, yeah, Final Fantasy has some great music. Absolutely. Okay, Dith, let's dive in. First thing that I would like to urge you to do is be a lot more free with pedaling. Yeah? First of all, it's an arrangement, right? We're playing a piano arrangement of a larger orchestral piece. We can get away with a lot more stuff than we might necessarily be able to get away with if this was written specifically for piano. Depends on who the composer is. Let me play a little bit of it for you first. Then we're going to take a look at the score and talk some more. But, for example, when we get into more of the arpeggiated stuff that the left hand has, let's start here. Feel free to use a lot more pedal. So throughout each of these measures, I'm just putting the pedal down, one pedal per measure. Yeah? We don't have to be afraid of any of that blur coming together. Did you say the original is just a piano piece and the orchestral arrangement came after? I didn't know that. Really cool tidbit. Thanks for sharing that, Dith. I haven't heard the original piano piece. Maybe the original doesn't use as much pedal. I still think it sounds nice, though. So one pedal per bar. All of these arpeggios that we have, Those are all chord tones. So we don't have to worry about blurring any of that or any of it being too much, right? If we do just a real quick analysis, let me show you exactly what we're looking at. Okay, so I've started here in measure 27, 8, 9, 30. If we look just real quick at the chords, the combination of all of those pitches and what they make. Yes, this is A minor. The notes that make up A minor are A, E, of course A again, C, E. That only leaves one pitch that's not in the triad of A minor, and that's the B. And the B, especially, we could call it two things. I typically call it the ninth. Some people would call it an add 2. I like saying add 9 because I always think of that note as being an octave away. And here it is, actually. So let's mark this as the 9. So we could even think of, especially when it's that far from the root, it's still a chord tone. Whenever we have all chord tones, we can always put the pedal down and let them all ring together. And in fact, if we would continue to go measure to measure to measure, the arpeggio is exactly the same representation of root, fifth. If we look at the next bar, here we have F, root, I'll even make R, root, fifth, root, 9, I'll put above again, third, and fifth. And that's the same as what we had in the previous bar. We can go bar after bar after bar. And I think just about all of these are exactly that same representation in an arpeggiation. So, long story short, you can feel free, put one pedal down, let all of that come together. And we just change at the bar line. Even this bar, that was bar 34. This last note, even though that is the fourth, let's say like a suspended 4 of the chord, it's still okay. If we use our ears and listen to what that sounds like when it's all blurred together, it's still really pretty and it's really nice. So, great. That was the first thing. Let's go back and talk a little bit about that with adding the right hand in. So, even with all of those melody notes, even this measure that has the descending thirds, that's not a problem, right? I think we'll all agree that's not a problem, right? Let me see, let me catch up. And you say, so Dith, you said it does use a lot of pedal. Cool, okay. So all that said, we could go through all of these bars. There's going to be a lot of places where we can just lean into the pedal, let it blur, let it come together. It's going to sound really pretty. Even the measures where we have kind of scalar, stepwise motion, and those are usually the spots that we need to think about the most and watch out for the most. Even in these places, it's just fine. Of course, if this was Bach, which we're going to talk about second, that would definitely not be fine. This is a different, totally different style of music. Okay, next topic. Oh, these left-hand arpeggios. So speaking of the same thing, but let's look somewhere else. Let's look down here. I'm going to take these, starting in measure 13. And I couldn't see, Dith, I couldn't see a whole lot of your left hand while you were playing. Oh, hello, Jean-Francois from France. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Let me go back and just mention one quick thing, Dith. And this is great for everybody. Whenever you're making a recording, or if you're taking lessons online, or sending one in for here, be sure that your camera is not mirrored. So Dith, one of the things that happened was that you filmed this, it looks like we're watching from your left, but actually the camera was on your right and it was mirrored. So we saw your right hand close, but it looked like it was in the left part of the piano, which is always a little disconcerting watching back. But secondly, also, I couldn't really see what your left hand is doing. So I'm going to say a couple things just based on what it sounded like, and hopefully they'll also help you physically with how we articulate these pitches. Okay, let's jump back in. Starting in measure 13, I'm going to take these arpeggios. They're all marked up an octave, and you did that great. I'm going to take them down an octave just for demonstration. So I would love to know, Dith, what fingering you're using. If you're crossing 3 over the top of the octave here onto F sharp. So are you playing 5, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1? That would be great. Hopefully you're doing that. And if you are doing that, let's jump back over here now. As we play this, we can practice this a couple different ways. We can practice a nice legato cross of 3 over the thumb. So thumb, even without any pedal, nice and legato. But we can also practice a little bit more fluid motion with the left hand. When we let go of thumb, my hand always wants to go early to 3, which is great. But if we let go of thumb, let me do it with that pedal so you can really hear the difference. Now we hear that break that's in between. Because instead of crossing and holding and shifting the hand, we're allowing the hand to just change position. So if we practice both of those things, just a slight lift, more like just letting the key rebound against our finger, let it push back and release, and then move on to 3. Practice that and practice what you've probably already been doing, which is a full cross of 3 over the top. And what that's going to do is, if we're not locked into this feeling that everything has to be super legato and stay in the keys, sometimes that can cause us to get tense and we start feel like we're pushing on each pitch instead of letting them ring and letting them bloom and being really relaxed as we play. And in something like this, all we really want to do is kind of paint a picture. We want to paint with large brush strokes. This is setting up a texture, not counterpoint. It's not where we don't need to hear that like it's its own melody, right? So if we practice those 2 different ways, that's going to make the left hand, I think, a lot easier for you to navigate across those finger changes, if those are posing some of a problem for you. Yeah? Let's see. And Dith, I see your fingering now. Yes, that's a good choice. So just add in this other little bit of practice where we're not solely relying on finger legato to play everything. And you can even test yourself without pedal. So use pedal and use no pedal for 2 different reasons. If we test ourselves with pedal, we should be able to play both articulations fully finger legato, like this, and without that finger legato, like this. And we want them to sound as identical as possible with the pedal. And without the pedal, we can really find out if we're truly articulating things the way we intend. So if we play with finger legato, without pedal, very connected. Now without finger legato, without pedal, all detached. When we put the pedal down, can that all detached one sound exactly the same as the fully legato one? That was detached. That was legato. Very, very similar. If you've got really good ears, you might notice a hair of difference in there. But that hair is not what we're going to talk about today. So we want a little more freedom of motion in the left hand, Dith. Same thing goes a little bit for your right hand. Sometimes we get a little locked into playing in a particular place. And I get it. We want to create, especially because you haven't used as much pedal, we want to create that line. That's good. But we can have a little more freedom in the wrist, a little more freedom in the fingers, especially once we use more pedal. So all of this continues to move. It's very fluid, yes? Instead of kind of getting stuck and playing, if I play without pedal, it's hard to make that fully legato connection. Thanks, backwards fellow. I will come to that. Hopefully you'll be back in time. And Julio, welcome, Julio. Okay, Dith, is that all making sense? And are you at a piano where you can try some of this out, or no? Yes and yes. Sweet. I just have one more thing. And this is why I asked you that first question about if this is just for fun or if this is for an exam. Because if it's just for fun, this is... okay, now that you've told me this was originally for solo piano, I might go back on this just a hair. But I think there's still freedom because of the genre this piece is, and because it has been orchestrated and a lot has been done with it. There is freedom for us to partially arrange it ourselves if you want to. And I think there's a ton of stuff that we can learn about music if we dive into a couple small little things. So, for example, a really, really basic way of creating our own arrangement. If we go back to this spot I was just playing, I'm not going to show the sheet music this time, but the music is notated as the left hand up an octave from where it's written. So it would be here. Well, we have to repeat this. So we get to the end of the piece, it says go back, take the coda. Okay, when we go back around and repeat, feel free to drop the left hand. Now, that's something we would never do with a piece of classical music, but I think it is 100% acceptable in a case like this. Yeah? The second thing we can do, if you feel like, especially we get some octaves later on, yes, we have this spot. Let me show this on the screen. So we're looking up here at the top of the page. Basically the last 3 bars. You could very much feel free to add I'll put these in red since this is a slightly different thing we're talking about. You could add the 5th here if you wanted to. You could add the 5th here if you wanted to. You could add something else in, you could take that note away, play the 3rd, and then play the note that's marked. And that all adds interest and does a little bit more for us. And it will get us thinking about, well, what are the chord tones? What can I add? What is hopefully just as easy to play? We don't want to necessarily make it more difficult. But can we expand the colors and the textures? Yeah? What if the second time around we get to this bar that has this very strange kind of sounding B? Interesting. What if the second time around we want to provide more finality to that statement? Well, instead of writing something that's out of root position, which is what that is, it's a C major chord with the 7th of the chord, the major 7th, put on the bottom. What if we change that and we say, well, I'm going to play something in C Interesting. You can go back and listen to that. I'm just playing, instead of B on the bottom, I'm playing a low C. 2 ledger lines down, and then G as marked, and then E up here, and then G, C, E. So it's a slight renotation of things. Oh, I added a B in there somewhere. There it is. So we keep the 7th of the chord right there instead of the G. Yes? We can feel free to do some things like that, as long as we have good musical reasons for doing them. This is an arrangement, yes? So we can make some of it our own, most definitely. In that process, we're going to learn a lot about music. We're going to learn a lot about how the composers used chords. We're going to be doing like really practical chord identification in the notation. We're going to make it maybe even more fun to play because it's going to be partly our own creation as well. And you don't need to do a ton of different stuff. Take things up an octave here, take things down an octave somewhere else. Change up the inversion. That's what we just did with that chord. Instead of making it a 7th chord in final inversion, 4/2 inversion, we took the same chord, shifted it to root position. Totally different sound. Yeah? I kind of like it for the second time around, because the second time around we want to provide kind of a more grand feeling and a bigger feeling of finality, of coming to a close. Yeah? Cool. Dith, do you have any other questions for me? That covers everything that I saw that I wanted to touch on. Bedlington Groomer, thanks for that. You say, how cool that it's okay to add a few notes. Yes. Yeah, with music that's not classical. Only on rare occasions can we get away with something like that in classical rep. There have been a few list etudes I've played where I've added octaves, like it needs to be any harder. But just for a bigger, bolder sound, instead of it being kind of 2 notes, that trill, I might add octaves in both hands. Something like that. It's a lot more difficult to play, though. But it was for a musical purpose, and I think, Liszt wouldn't have a problem with that, knowing his personality. But a lot of other classical rep, we really should stay away from changing the score. Depends on the composer. So, yeah, Dith, just waiting on you if you've got any questions for me. In the meantime, I think, Dith, you did a great job playing. Yeah? We just want to add a little bit of that pedal, a little more freedom in the mechanism, in the wrists, and in the arms. And have fun, experiment with how you would change some of the notes around. Okay, now you ask, how would I end the piece? Because it's on kind of an endless loop. Let's see. Oh, interesting. It goes to B. I don't love that. Let's see. Gosh, Dith, I'm inclined to just end it exactly the way it's written. Because going back to our 1 chord does not feel right at all. After all of this other exploration. The one thing I might change in the last bar is here we have written this suspension that's made with the E, which causes kind of a lot of blur against the the already resolved left hand. So something I might do there for the very end is change our E to a D sharp. And just put that with the B at the beginning of the bar. Now, that sounds much more like an ending. Putting that in context, let's go back up. The last bar of the top line you can see. I think that sounds good. So Woolsley says maybe some arpeggios that go up to the top. Yeah, you could take this same arpeggio that's in B, continue arpeggiating up the keyboard, end with a chord. That's nice. The only other way, if we wanted to get back to our original one chord, which was E minor, would be we'd have to write some sort of like a postlude or an extra coda. Something like that. But I think that's just, it's too much. It's too much. The music doesn't really need that. So that's a very simple solution to just bringing it to an end. Eliminate that one suspension, and we just play B major. Yeah. Cool. Let me answer, Julio, I'm going to answer your question, and then we're going to jump over to Ser Woolsley's performance. So Julio says, when learning a new piece, is it better to practice without pedal first? It's a slightly complicated question because there are a lot of different levels of players that are watching. For the most part, my answer is no. The pedal is part of the piano. It's part of the musical instrument, and it has a lot to do with how we hear sound. It has a lot to do with how we execute different passages as well. Therefore, if the pedal is if we're planning on using it in performance, we should use it from day one of practice. We can eliminate it to help us hear other things that are happening. We can eliminate it to help us hear if we're articulating fingers correctly, or if we're really going for a finger legato. Is it truly finger legato, or are we kind of cheating by holding the pedal down, right? But there's also, and this is something I end up correcting in my private students all the time, even some people that have transferred to me from other teachers, where the act of finger legato is, it takes like it's the most important thing. It's more important than everything else that gets talked about. And so sometimes people have come into lessons with me and they're doing all of these contortions with the hand that aren't necessary because we're going to use the pedal to connect. Yeah. We have to be, I think, really careful about when we choose to play with finger legato, with or without pedal. There are good reasons to do that. But as soon as we have the pedal down, we can make, legato simply means smooth, connected, right? We can connect anything with the pedal down. Therefore, if it's going to be used in final performance, use it on day one of practice, because it's also going to hugely inform how your ear hears what you're working on, how harmonies are coming together to be blended, how if you need to voice a melody up, you're playing like a Chopin nocturne, and you need to bring out the melody, well, how you articulate that, the dynamic it actually ends up being is going to be different if it's being played against one pitch at a time. Just go to the one that I have memorized, right? That sounds totally different than with the pedal. So how I'm going to feel when I play that melody is going to be very different with the pedal than without. Therefore, I don't want to practice a different motion with the mechanism as I'm preparing the piece and as I'm learning the notes. So that early stage of ingraining whatever the motions are, that's really important. And if we can avoid changing what we learn on day one later on, I think we're going to save ourselves a lot of time. Yeah. Now, the flip side of that, because I said we have different levels tuning in, when adding pedal is just plain too much to think about. If we are having trouble thinking about what the two hands are doing already, then eliminate the pedal if you want to. You're going to be much better off having things clean and being able to focus on the motion of the two hands rather than accidentally, let's say, letting, this chord and this chord and this chord all blur together because our mind is so focused on what we're doing that we forget to change. And in the meantime, our ear is being fed this not good harmony, right? Ser Woolsley says you might want to practice without pedal in certain spots. I totally agree with that. That eliminating pedal in practice for specific reasons, that can be a really good thing. But I'd be careful because we want to know exactly what those reasons are. Why are we getting rid of pedal? We're getting rid of it to hear specific things. And then when we tune into those specific things, we can make adjustments. Right? I hope that makes sense to everybody. Okay. Beautiful, beautiful. Let's give Dith one more quick round of applause for such a great performance. Dith, if you want to send it in to us again after you've had some work, please do. We'd love to take another listen. And we're going to jump over to Ser Woolsley playing some Bach for us. Bedlington Grimmer, eliminate pedal for those of us who are beginners or early intermediate. It's very much, I think, a case-by-case basis. So whenever we can play with pedal, play with pedal. If the act of pedaling is causing other problems to happen with the hands, eliminate the pedal for a short time until the hands and the fingers get worked out. But even for early beginners, when I'm working with them, I try to incorporate the pedal as early as possible because it is such a part of just about everything that we're going to play. And like I said, we don't want to, if possible, we don't want to get in the habit of practicing some things without everything being present, right? The closer we can get to putting all of the components together, the better. It's just that we're not always able to put all of them together. So we have to keep that in mind on an individual kind of basis. So in an assessment, Bedlington Grimmer, in an assessment of, you say a beginner or early intermediate. Yeah, in an assessment of your own playing during practice time, does your ear tell you my foot is getting stuck because I don't have enough brain space to think about it? Okay, if that's the case, eliminate the pedal. If that's not the case, though, don't. And as soon as possible, try to incorporate the pedal into even a completely new piece, even for an early beginner or an early intermediate player. Okay. Awesome. We're going to jump over to Ser Woolsley. Ser Woolsley sent in the Allemande from Bach's fourth French suite. So we're going to take a listen to that. Let me pull that up, Ser Woolsley. Here we go. Okay, let's enjoy Ser Woolsley's Bach. Very nice, Ser Woolsley. Let's give Ser Woolsley a round of applause in the chat. Oh, very nice. Ser Woolsley, you've come such a long way. I think the first thing you sent in maybe a year ago or so, you were playing Satie. This is such a long way from some of the more simple Satie. So really, really nice stuff, Ser Woolsley. Yes, Dith. Yeah, awesome. Ser Woolsley, when he sent this over, he sent a couple questions for me as well. So I'm going to tackle those questions first, and then I have a couple questions for you, Ser Woolsley. Actually, we're going to start with one of those. This is open to anybody. Anybody can answer, but especially for Ser Woolsley. What is an Allemande? Oh, Ser Woolsley, you said, shame, I choked a bit. No, don't talk like that to yourself. Stay positive. There's so much good about your performance. Stay positive. Dith says, German. Well, that's a good guess because we are talking about Bach. It is kind of a foreign word for us English speakers. Let's see if anybody else has a guess. Okay, beautiful. Ser Woolsley says, French suites are a collection of different dances from different countries. So let's unpack that just a tidbit. Bach himself never actually titled the suites French or English. Those titles were given to the suites around 40 years or so, at least 40 years after the French suites were composed. Those were given to the pieces. There is no historical evidence that Bach thought of any of the French suites as having a French influence, other than how he spelled the name of the Allemande, or how he spelled the name of some of the dances. So, Ser Woolsley, you're correct that the suites are dances. The Allemande is a type of dance. It's a type of Baroque dance. It's a it's kind of a slow, controlled, very elegant dance. If you haven't already, watch on YouTube an Allemande dance being performed, because it'll influence a bit of how you feel the music. So that little bit of history, we don't have any writings from Bach, nor we don't even have the original manuscripts from the suites anymore. So all of the copies are, whatever urtext you're using, they are usually kind of a combination of different sources from Bach's students to say these are the notes that Bach intended. We also don't have any writings from Bach really talking a lot about the influence of the notes he wrote on the page, or what influenced them. So we'll take that for what it is. There's a little bit of theory that really a lot of the suites are mostly written in more of an Italian style than a French style or an English style. And that has to do with just history of counterpoint and things like that. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole. Jess says, don't you do an Allemande in square dancing? Yes, that term has come to also mean a very specific, would you call it like a turn or a movement? It's a very specific movement in square dancing as well. But when this suite was written, I think 1722, square dancing definitely didn't exist. Okay. So we know this is a dance, very elegant, kind of moderate speed dance. Ser Woolsley's first question for me that he emailed me was about a little bit of how to practice the first few bars. So let's take a look at those. So I already have it written on here. You asked about practicing bars 3, 4, and 5 in particular, because you said they tend to kind of either get rushed. You're not consistent with the tempo, is what you said, right? So Part of that probably has something to do with the shape of the hand that we have on the keyboard as we play this. We're pretty far up and into the keys as we play through all of this. And so inherently, because we're not able to play as far out toward us, but we have to play more inside the keys, there's going to be inherently less control that we have over each key depression. So even here, you can see this B flat 7. You see where I'm playing it in the keyboard. Let me actually switch cameras so you can see it from this side too. We're quite far in. So that's something we simply have to work around. But that could be one cause of why you're having some inconsistencies as you go through these measures. Okay, the second thing, Ser Woolsley, I would really count, not with syllables or anything like that, but I would feel the 16th note pulse for these bars while you play it. You could put on a metronome if you wanted to. So we're feeling all of these little sub-pulses. That'll keep our rhythm nice and accurate. The other thing you can do is you're playing this very delicately and very softly, which is lovely for performance, but in practicing, you might want to play out a little bit more. So this more like a mezzo forte to forte. Feeling a really solid finger strike on every one of those pitches. And if we need to slow down to feel that, that's fine. Yeah. You can say a lot of times you accidentally add an accent on the 5th finger. Yeah. I would still recommend these couple things. Yes, you say you don't want to give pulse on the 5th. That's what you want to avoid. I would fix that by first adding pulses everywhere. So if we can feel the impulse like that in every one of the fingers, not just accidentally in one finger. So when you have movement from 5 to 4, how can we play 4 to have an equal impulse into the keyboard as 5? How can we play all 5 fingers? We have to use all 5 throughout these bars, heavily. It's not quite musical yet, but we're working on, this is individual articulation, right? So a little bit higher dynamic and focusing on all of the micro rhythmic pulses. Now, this is a different practice technique than how we're going to think about it when we sit down to perform it, or if we're going to practice performing it, right? When we sit down to do that, we're going to think in much broader strokes, much bigger beats. But for practice purposes, especially when things are a little inconsistent like you're talking about, let's build that consistency in our practice. So we're also I'm getting rid of any potential differentiation in the voices, which is something I'm going to talk about in a minute and when we talk about musicality and stuff. But we're playing everything evenly. Just hear all fingers evenly. Yes? And can we continue to do that with as little tension as possible? That's what I would recommend for these bars to aid in the eventually avoiding accents, right? The better you get at creating equal impulses at a higher dynamic, the better we're also going to get with creating all of those equal or lesser impulses at lower dynamics and having more control over each finger. So if I go back and I play this from the top in a much more musical way, Yeah. Now I can choose, because I've done that other practice, yeah, I can choose how I want to voice each voice, how I want to bring it out, how I want to subdue it, where I want the focus to be, because we've really isolated individual fingers like that. Before we get to your second question, Ser Woolsley, which was about adding, making it more interesting on the second repeat of the second page, I want to quickly bring up and ask you a question about what's happening with, there are a couple little bobbles that happen with the notes in the middle of the performance. Are those things that happen commonly for you? Do they tend to happen in the same place, or do they kind of get mixed up? And I think, Ser Woolsley, you know what I mean by a little bobble. Sometimes there's like a little finger slide or something like that, where we're maybe in the wrong position at the when we want to play, we're not quite in the right position yet. So how consistent do those little things, how consistently do those happen? That's my first question for you. Or is it just kind of, is it random? Do they happen once in a while and you're not totally certain that they're going to happen until they've happened? You said fat fingers. Okay. If we can eliminate some of that, you're going to be playing this piece very well. So the first question, the first thing I'd want to revisit with you, and I can't really see it super well on the video, but the first thing I'd ask is, what are the fingerings that you're using in a couple of these places, especially those lines where the hand has to be very far into the keys? You say sometimes you use a finger slide to create the legato line. Okay, that's a good thing. And then when you do that, you're playing the correct notes, I'd say, on both sides. But sometimes it's like in between, maybe a finger cross, something like that. It's not right. It's not jazzy. And maybe it could be something like that, where we, instead of sliding up from the bottom, we're sliding from the top, and it's an accident. And it seems like it's because the finger that we intend to play isn't quite in position yet to play. So it's we either need to take a little bit more time, or we need to address what fingers you're using for a couple of these passages. So I marked 1, 2, 3. I marked 5 places where I heard these kind of little bobbles happen. And I am trying to figure out what is causing them to happen for you. And the conclusion that I'm usually coming to, other than that one, is maybe we need to take a look at fingering. So, Ser Woolsley, let's look at, I'll give you a couple fingering choices for these spots that I marked, in case they're helpful. Take them or leave them. Here we go. So back in measure 5, we had one where this first circle is. And I'm playing this with 2, 5, 4, 2. And then this gets taken with the left hand. So 2, 5, 4, 2. Because of that, and because we have thumb on the previous A flat, by the time I play the second finger, when the second finger is articulated, the entire rest of this grouping is under the hand. Oh, I lost the sheet music on you guys. Give me a second to pull that back. There it is. Okay, now you can actually see what I wrote down. So we're looking at measure 5. Thumb on A flat, 2, 5, 4, 2. Yes? Because of that, Rotzi. Well, welcome, Rotzi. First of all, this is Bach's Allemande. For most people consider this the first movement of his fourth French suite. Okay, so if our hand is in that position for this bar we're talking about, 2, 5, 4, 2, then there would be no need for a fingering change or a hand position shift right where that blue circle is, because when second finger plays, I'm already in position to play 5, 4, 2. So that one gets completely eliminated. Let's look at the next spot in measure 7. And I think I can give you this fingering, Ser Woolsley, because I think you've got pretty big hands. So we need to be holding 5, of course, on that quarter note. And then I like to use 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2. 2, 1, 2. 2, 1, 2, 3, 5. So that blue number 2 right there, that just means it only happened the second time on your second repeat, not on the first repeat. So, and once again, if we're in the position to play with those fingers, that kind of eliminates the potential that there's going to be a little bit of a bobble there. The next one is not so easy. This one I can definitely see. We really only have one choice here. We have to play 1 on the bottom, 5 on the top, and then probably 5, 4, 3, 5. There it is. And then we have to quickly shift 3 down there. So in that particular case, let me show you this one from my top down. Because in this particular case, 3 has to come kind of over G flat or F sharp. And then that's where we can potentially have that little accident there. One way around that is if you do curl 3 in a little bit more, where we play it out here on the key, then we're okay. Yeah? So I hope that these are giving you a couple things just to check out on your end. See if you're using those fingers or if it's possible to change to those fingers without really messing up your memory and your muscle memory. And hopefully those can help work you through some of the little things and make it more consistent, where we're already in the hand position whenever possible. And I do agree with you, Ser Woolsley, we're working on finger sustain. You said that your teacher wants you to play this to study finger sustain notes. Absolutely. Super important. We can, if we have time, we can get into a little bit of a discussion about pedal versus no pedal. But overall, we never want it to sound like we're using pedal, regardless of your take on those two things. We never want it to blur or sound like we're using pedal. So, Ser Woolsley, your second question for me was about the second page. And what can we do to vary it some more? Create more interest on the second repeat. And this is what I'm going to tell you is something you can also use on the first page as well. You said you're studying Schiff's recording. Schiff is great. Schiff is great for Bach in particular. The recording you sent, ironically, he's not playing all of the right notes. And it doesn't seem like, I don't think I don't know if if he learned it from a different manuscript or a different copy, because there are slightly different editions. But it wasn't an accident in performance. Ser Woolsley sent a live performance video of Andras Schiff playing this for me to take a listen to. And on the two repeats, he played it exactly the same on both sides. So it wasn't like there was a memory thing and he improvised his way through it. but the notes are definitely in some places different. The other thing, so this will be a great listening test, Ser Woolsley, go through, there are some places where Schiff does not, according to the score, does not accurately hold the voices for their duration, and he doesn't accurately show their movement. And a lot of times it actually is happening on the second page of the piece. Oh, it's a good question. So Ser Woolsley says, what do you think about him not playing some notes in the first few bars of the first page? And he is really, yes, he is really tying some pitches. So what he plays is, this is all as written, but then here, tie, and then another tie. I have a couple thoughts about that. He is doing it, and it's absolutely on purpose. I would want to know from him why he's doing it, because in every score that I have pulled up, there are no ties marked. There are no indicators, even in the Henley text, which I pulled out, which has a couple different variations. They pulled some things from different scores and said, well, here are a couple variations for you to consider, even notes that are slightly different. And those ties are not present. So he probably has a good reason for doing it, but I cannot find what it is. And secondly, the second kind of issue with it is that not one other performer that I listen to ties those pitches. So that makes me question the validity of the choice. And considering this is Bach, I feel like the score is somewhat holy in a sense, that we shouldn't really be changing it. Not like that. So if you can find another person that's employing ties in those places, I'd be more inclined to think there is some research out there that I can't readily find that says that that's an option. Otherwise, I'm not super inclined to take it, because all kinds of other extremely well-known concert pianists do not do that. And they don't even, a lot of them also don't use pedal to create the legato line. So you say, Ser Woolsley, like what you just said, you think it's because those repeated notes create a bumpy road in what otherwise is a very linear line. Let me give you an example. I'll start from the beginning. Even those first two, without pedal, we can still create. It's not perfectly legato connected, no, but we can still create minimal bumps. It's possible to play all of those pitches with absolutely no pedal and not have the repeats be distracting. So those are my 2 cents on how Schiff plays ties through some of those bars. If I were going to perform the piece or record it, I would not put the ties in, because I cannot find a source that says that it's a possibility. Now, the rest of Schiff's performance, I've said a lot of kind of negative things about the performance. He is a fantastic interpreter of Bach, and he does so many things with such great fluency. And that's really cool. That's something I think we can absolutely learn from. The way he brings out different voices and the way he changes articulation, mid-phrase sometimes. It's really, really nice. Okay, what can we do about the second page? Initially I brought up the recording because I'd like you to listen to another recording. I'd like you to listen to this Allemande as recorded by Vladimir Feltzmann. He made a recording of it. I think it's from 2016. The album is all of the French suites. He will probably play it a little slower than you like, and with a little more pedal and a little more blur than you would like. Oh yeah, Ser Woolsley, ask him, sure, if you can. So Feltzmann's recording, one of the things that I love about him is that I have a little bit of a bias because I studied with him personally. But secondly, I know that he's done a tremendous amount of research, historical research about Bach, and he adds ornaments that aren't in any of the print editions. And Rotze, you like Gould's Bach. That would be a hot topic discussion. I highly dislike Gould's Fourth Suite. It is nothing like an Allemande, like a dance. It is so far removed from that. It's interesting. That doesn't mean I don't like other of Gould's recordings of Bach. But in listening and pulling and listening to a whole bunch of people to try to find this answer about the ties that we just talked about, I listened to maybe the first 3 lines of Gould's recording before I had to turn it off, because it was so out of character. Okay, so Ser Woolsley, we're in agreement. There we go. So Ser Woolsley, listen to Feltzman's recording. It's a bit slow and it's going to be a bit more blurred than you like, but he adds ornaments, and I can trust that they are historically informed because I know the kind of research that he does about Bach and about the music. To give you a quick example, this is how he actually differentiates both repeats on the first page and the second page. He adds a little ornament there. And it's just one little thing. And later on in the page, let's see. This is all still unornamented. Whoops. I believe it's here. He adds another little turn. So you can listen to that recording. The ornaments are all pretty easy to make out. They're all little just neighbor tones. One of them is a passing tone in the very last bar of the piece. He adds a little passing tone up to B flat. So that's one very, very simple way of creating a difference. Second time, yes, I will type the name in. There we go. Okay. So it'll be a great listening exercise. Second thing, though, that we can do is simply, but not simply, choose to bring out different voices in different repeats. And Ser Woolsley, yeah, personal preference. You don't know if you like ornaments in the Allemande. That's totally fine. Take a listen, see what you think. Okay, second thing. How can we change the priority we give to different voices? And this is really what makes Bach such an interesting thing to study, such interesting music. Let me play through the second page. Let's see here. I'll play through and put the sheet music on the screen so we can all follow along. Here we go. I'm going to play through it twice. I'm going to play through the first time. I'm going to mostly bring out the uppermost voice, especially the first 3 lines. The second time around, I am going to mostly bring out the middle voice, especially the first 3 lines. I'll probably, change that for the bottom 2. But here we go. Sorry about that. Second time, more of the inner voice. Back to more standard. So that's one idea. And you don't even have to bring out a single voice for that kind of extended period of time. I happen to like the way that some reason I'm drawn to the middle voice, especially that resolution. And there's some interesting things, especially with the holds. In a lot of performances of Bach, we can tend to shift back and forth between only bringing out the lines that have more movement. And we can say this piece is basically 3 voices. We can really choose to bring out any of the 3 that we'd like. And that's something like that Schiff does back at the beginning. When he repeats the first page, he brings out the lowest voice, the bass. Here's another idea. As you get into bars 3, 4, 5, what we already talked about for technical reasons, there are also these interesting dissonances and resolutions that happen in the middle voice again. So here, resolution, dissonance, let's call it, resolution, dissonance, resolution. This is now in the bass voice, dissonance, resolution. All of those, we could create little micro shapes out of that. So there are more options there, and we can we can dive into every voice and find them. I just saw your comment. Ser Woolsley says, "What about shifting the voice to the left hand?" Are you talking about page 2? Well, I think if you haven't done it on page 1 already, I don't think you want to do a repeat of how you change the voices, because the counterpoint is similar enough, especially in the first couple bars. I don't think we want to repeat how we would highlight voices from the first 3 bars to bars 11, 12, 13. Oh, you said, Ser Woolsley, you're talking generally about the first page. What do I think about how he shifts the voice to the left hand? I think I like it on page 1. I think I like it on page 1. I also really like some of what he does in the middle. So we have this descending line that's staccato, more like pizzicato. And then he takes the same voice and more like arco, bowed, to highlight that really interesting chromatic movement. And then we shift back to some other voices. And I think he even goes into kind of a more plucked dancing. So that's possible. Those are really advanced things, because as soon as we make that choice, we really need to be able to execute it for the duration of the phrase. So, if we play that legato, can we really make sure that it's fully smooth and connected all the way down? If we do the same thing here. And then where do we choose to change that articulation? And why? We need to have a really good reason for that. It's when we dive this deeply into thinking about the different voices. Personally, I don't know if I'd know if I'd legato that bass line the way he does. I like his performance. To me, it feels I can more naturally bring it out if I detach there. Thank you, Internet Privacy. Good to see you. Yes, so you say the spot he changes, Ser Woolsley, the spot he changes between the legato versus more pizzicato between repeats. I think it's a great thing to model. I think I get the impression listening to Schiff's recording that he made that decision on the spot in that concert. And that if we were to find a kind of a standalone recording of his playing, not live, there might be, we might hear the beginning of a phrase change a little bit more purposefully. That speaks a lot to his brilliance, because if he was thinking about all three voices live and deciding on the spot how he's going to bring different ones out, that's wonderful. That's something I think we can all aspire to. But I'd like to know, because sometimes the beginnings of his phrases would start one way, and then halfway through, it would change from being legato to more detached, or vice versa. And it was almost like I got the impression he'd like changed his mind in the middle. Yes, Internet Privacy says, Schiff says he never uses pedal with Bach, and that is totally true. You'll never find a recording of him using pedal. So, Ser Woolsley, does that help at all? I gave you a couple different ideas. I hope that second page, because you were talking about how the recordings you've been listening to, they don't make big changes on the second page. You can do the same kind of thing. Listen for different voices. I showed you the middle voice that I really like bringing out. Create different articulations, right? One thing maybe two things. One thing for sure I want to point out. Let's go back to the music. So here on the second page, and I see that you're also, come on, this F. I see you're taking it with the left hand. That's great. Not every edition shows it to be taken with the left hand, but you have to. So we're forced, if you're going to be totally historically accurate, this is played with thumb, and so is this. There's going to have to be a slight lift to let the thumb change position. If you're not completely opposed to pedaling, we can throw a tiny bit of pedal down on that last 16th, so that hopefully nothing else blurs, but we can attach that inner line. Something like that. There's just a touch in there. Okay, that's one possibility. Or just accept that there's going to be a slight detachment from the E to the F. But the second thing that I wanted to talk about, especially because I think you can reach it, Ser Woolsley, can we play and hold this down? So, and then release. The way Schiff plays that, he lets go immediately, and it's almost like we've lost that inner voice right there. And then even throughout the whole rest of the page, the inner voice is somewhat gone, and everything turns into like a two-part invention. So. Here's a voice. Another one. And then I do some really big stretching here to maintain finger legato. Yeah. So think about that, because Schiff's recording that you like to listen to, Ser Woolsley, doesn't, he kind of loses the 3-part essence of the piece over the last 3 lines. So see if, is there a way for you to continue to incorporate that and highlight all those different stem directions. Internet Privacy says if you had two manual harpsichord, the fingering approach could be very different. In fact, that is totally true. And in fact, the way that we would use the fingers on the modern piano is totally different than how an early performer or someone specializing in early music, or how Bach himself would have played. For example, I'm not an expert in this, but for example, a lot of Baroque music is played with only 3 fingers. And there is very little 4 and 5 used. There is absolutely never, ever, ever thumb on a black key. Now, most performers today don't abide by those rules. Technique has changed a lot. The way the instrument performs has changed a lot. But that's just an interesting historical tidbit about how this would have been played. Fingering choices would be substantially different for an early musician performing on a period instrument versus how we're doing this today. Cool. That brings up a question. And by the way, let's give Ser Woolsley a round of applause. Really nice work, Ser Woolsley. It's very nice. If we can just iron out a couple of those little bobbles and create a little more interest between the voices, you've got something really, really nice brewing here. So good job. So Seth says clap. Oh, by the way, hello, Seth. Oh, I'm going back up and let's see. By the way, we can open things up to questions. We've spent quite a bit of time on these 2 examples, but really good stuff to talk about. So I was inspired a little bit by Internet Privacy's comment from just a little bit up the chat. They say you have to consider that these pieces were not written for the modern piano. So my question to everybody today, feel free to drop your thought in the comment in the chat. Should Bach be played according to what the modern piano is capable of? Because if he was alive today, he would want that. Or should Bach be played on the modern piano more like it would have been played on the instrument he wrote it on? Because that's what Bach heard when he put the notes down. Drop a couple thoughts in the chat. It's quite the rabbit hole. Many of you have probably seen, Seth says both because there's no way to know. I like that answer, Seth. Many of you have probably seen, there's a quick video on tone-based piano, and they show like 20 different pianists basically talking about pedal in Bach, and one after the other says yes pedal and then no pedal and yes pedal and no pedal, and they're all very well-known people. Yeah. So it's an interesting topic to think about and discuss. I tend to agree a little bit with Seth and Ser Woolsley. Ser Woolsley said a bit in the middle, because unless I was playing on a period instrument, I think I need to do some things that work on the piano. So I need to take fingering that works on the piano. I'm not going to be afraid to use a touch of pedal here and there, as long as it doesn't blur anything else. I never want to blur Bach. I never want to obscure the voice leading. But just because Bach didn't have pedal doesn't mean that I can't employ it today. I just don't want it to cloud his composition at all. Internet Privacy, I just read your comment. It sounds like we're somewhat in the same camp there. You say that your belief is you have to make it your own, and you're not necessarily a fan of authentic performances unless it's on a period instrument. I like that. And Thomas, oh, hello, Thomas. Thomas says, if Bach found himself sitting in front of a modern piano, would the difference have forced him to change how he plays it? I would take it further. I'd say Bach wouldn't have even written the music he wrote if he had the modern piano. He would be doing something completely different. Because he was such a musical genius, he was just responding to the sounds that he heard and that the instruments he had access to. And Ser Woolsley, that goes along, yes. Seymour Bernstein said that Bach would have, if he had a pianoforte, he would have never used the harpsichord. I 100% believe that. And you can hear more of Bach's expansive genius in the music he wrote for organ. Seth says Bach. Also, Bach might not be able to play it at all. Technique is, incredibly different on the piano than on organ or harpsichord, clavichord. Melinda says if Bach would have a modern piano, he would still respect the rules of Baroque articulation. Interesting. Yeah. I like that. And I think there's justification for that. If we look at other of Bach's music, what Bach wrote for string instruments, for example, other instruments, there's a very similar style and how articulation is approached and how time is given. It's a very Baroque way, even when it's not for a keyboard instrument. So yeah, I tend to agree with that as well. The only difference is if Bach didn't live in the Baroque era. Well, now we're going down a whole other rabbit hole. We don't have to go there. Oh, thank you, Ser Woolsley. Melinda says you used to be a pipe organist. Yeah, you've probably played a massive amount of Bach. And it's very different than, I think if you haven't had that experience, I took organ lessons also, just one semester, so not a massive amount. But it completely changes how you approach music from the period when you have to play it on that totally different instrument. Yeah, makes a big difference. Melinda says, I'll spare you. We're probably more in agreement. Melinda, the piano was just invented. Yes, it was. It was, but it still wasn't anywhere near like what we have today. So if we could say if Bach had the piano that Beethoven had at the end of Beethoven's life, how would things have changed? Yeah. I don't know. They're all very interesting topics of discussion. And yeah, they can easily lead to a rowdy conversation. Absolutely. Melinda says we could ask the same for Mozart, who had 2 octaves less. Absolutely. And he didn't have 2 octaves less. Just like Bach. When Bach wrote for the organ, he had this expansive instrument. When Mozart wrote for orchestra, he had this expansive instrument. So, for someone like that, such a genius like that, did they have to compromise their vision for their music in order to play it on the instrument that they had available? Because they obviously envisioned music that on a much bigger, grander scale. So, interesting questions. Let me pop back in and answer a couple that have come in. Let me start with Julio's, and then we're going to pop back up for Seth's question and go from there. Melinda says they didn't compromise articulations. Yes. Yeah. I agree with that. But they had a much wider range, right? So was their writing confined by the range of the instrument for keyboard instrument? If they had an extra octave, would they have wanted it in there? Because when they asked double bass to play it, were they upset that the piano or the pianoforte couldn't accommodate something similar at the time? Or did they not really think about it just because it wasn't a thing? The instrument didn't exist. So, yeah, all very interesting stuff. Okay, going back to Julio's question, how often does an acoustic piano need to be tuned? Every time you play a note, it goes out of tune, Julio. So the amount that it needs to be tuned is completely dependent on how picky your ears are and what your instrument is used for. Oh, Melinda, you're fine. You're fine. It's a fun discussion. So, Julio, when I have this instrument tuned, I usually have it tuned right before I'm going to make a recording for release, because I record a lot of stuff here at home. Not necessarily for YouTube videos, but if I'm going to put out a commercial release, I have it tuned on the day or the day before. And I'm usually not doing more than 1 or 2 pieces at a time these days, so one tuning goes just fine. It lasts me just fine for those couple things. When I was doing some bigger recording sessions, for example, like in a concert space, and I had limited access to the instrument, I only had access for a day or 2, and I'd have to record an entire album's worth of material, the piano would get tuned between every 1 to 2 pieces that I'd record. So every 2 hours, the piano would get tuned. So this piano gets tuned maybe 6 to 8 times a year. For most people, if you're not recording on the instrument all the time, for most people, the general recommendation is twice a year. To have your instrument tuned twice a year. And that keeps it fairly good. The more you have it tuned, actually, the better it's going to stay in tune, the more stable it becomes. So, but it really comes down to what you use it for and the purpose. And so that's a little bit up to you, but usually twice a year is about the minimum if you want to keep your instrument in good shape. Let me go back up a little bit to Seth had a question a little bit ago, so I'm going to jump into Seth's question, and then we're going to drop down into some of the more recent ones. Seth said, could you go into a bit of detail about neck-head position for piano? You think you're doing it wrong and somehow causing a bunch of tension. Okay. It's an interesting question, Seth, because you're going to find a lot of people, if you watch a lot of videos of people playing, that play with hunched shoulders and that play with the head down. There will be a lot of people that play with the head forward position. And that position itself, in and of itself, does not cause extra tension. And there's obviously, we can point to countless wonderful concert pianists that play like that have not had tension problems, that can play the most virtuosic repertoire, and that can do it night after night after night without injury. That said, we can learn a lot from just understanding good posture and good body position. So yes, I don't always put this into practice, and you probably see that on the videos, but I'm of the approach, if I'm thinking about posture and if I'm working with a student on it, if we think about as if there is a string coming out of the crown of our head, the back of our head, and that string pulls us straight into position. This is the same way I also teach voice to voice students when I used to conduct choir and things like that. For good posture, because it opens up everything in the torso. And when the torso is open, for pianists also, it also allows more freedom of expression of the arms. So that's really important. So can we feel that the head is being kind of just, the spine is being elongated, the head is up straight. We have to look down, which causes a slight change in that. But if we say we have something memorized and we don't need to use the hands, can we sit up straight and play? And do we have that option of going to that position? Yes. Bethany says you use the string visualization for your choir students too. Yes. So that's a great place to look, Seth. And can we put our body in that position? Can we play some things? Yes. Now, a lot of pianists are instantly, when we're reading music, we shift from that position slightly. When we're playing from memory, we shift further, and usually the bench is further back, and we're playing more over the keys and into the keys. None of those have to cause tension problems. So if you feel like things are being caused by an incorrect neck-head position, especially if you do a lot of score reading, the primary place that I find people have tension in the neck is when we're only reading off the score and we never shift that position into something else, like looking just at the hands, like playing from memory. If we're doing a lot of score reading, we can tend to turtle a little bit, and the neck and head go forward, and then we sit like that. And we don't realize it because we're so focused on what we're executing and what we're reading. So if you do a lot of that, if you're doing a lot of score reading, take a little bit of a break from it. Take 10 minutes to read, maybe work on doing some memorization of what you were just working on, reset your position, and stop. If the head is forward, we want to pull it back a little bit. And Nancy says Alexander technique, and that's really, yeah, that's where this principle comes from, and it applies both to writing and music. Interesting. Seth says it seems to be raising the shoulders involuntarily. So I'm glad that you have that awareness. Oh, by the way, Val, thank you for the super. I'm going to get to your question in just a second. Shane says turtling is proper. Seth, so I'm glad you have the body awareness to tell you that this is going on. That's really important. Head position is not connected to shoulder movement. So we want to try to isolate those two. So while you're playing, well, in the middle of a practice session, take a little break, stand up, shake the arms out, and even do some shoulder rolls to try to reset the position of where those are supposed to be so that they don't get stuck in an up position and they don't get stuck tense. As soon as the shoulders go up like that, we have compromised everything that we can do with the fingers and the hands. But shoulders up and shoulders down technically have very little to do with head forward versus head back and in line and back straight. So we want to isolate those even further. And if you, Seth, do you do a little bit of yoga? Can you do a little bit of yoga? I usually recommend that to people if they have posture issues that we can't fix purely on the bench. Primarily, we can learn more about body awareness and about how to correct and how to relax if we learn to experience the muscle groups in the body in some other way. Yoga is one great way to do that. A long time ago, and I wish I still had the resources from it, when I was 16 or so, I took a yoga for musicians masterclass at the college I was taking lessons at. And it was incredibly helpful. My teacher insisted that I go, even though I wasn't enrolled at the college, because at the time I had a lot of shoulder tension. And as soon as I started working with more muscle groups and feeling what it was like to put them purposely under tension and then relax them, a lot of that tension went away, and I was able to play much more freely. So Christopher, let's see, Christopher says there's a layer of tissue right below the skin, the superficial fascia, and this superficial fascia between the shoulder blades terminates in the tendon sheaths for the fingers. I did not know that. Very interesting tidbit. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. It makes sense that what we do at the shoulders, that it connects to everything we do at the fingers, but I did not know that piece of physiology. Very cool. Yes, so Christopher says with that in mind, it can help to sit so you have a little slack, relaxed tissue between the shoulder blades. Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. Okay, let me go back and answer another question. Seth, I hope that's a little bit helpful. Do some shoulder rolls at the piano. Try to shake things out when you can. Don't get too stuck in the score. And if you can take a yoga class, take a yoga class. Because nothing will substitute from that firsthand experience of feeling the body. Okay. Let's see, going back to Val's question. Val asks, do you have tips or exercises to improve articulation? I hope I didn't miss anything. I remember there being something about Hannon that I saw, which I'll have a few quick words about. Maybe it's right below this. Okay, so Val says, do you have tips or exercises to improve articulation? You find that after a while, your fingers tend to stumble or you mess up the tempo. Yeah. Val, the biggest thing I'd recommend is practice in rhythmic groupings. Let's just take a simple scale to demonstrate that. So if we're in B, Practice, let's just practice in long, short groups. This could be like triplets. Okay, we can do that also detached. Really important that every articulation of the finger is followed by immediate relaxation. So even if I'm holding down a key, as soon as the key is depressed, there is no more force going into the key other than simply what it takes to hold the key down, which is not very much. So if you were here, and this is something I do with my in-person students, you can try it for yourself. If you press a key, and now it's being held down, first of all, can you make nice wrist circles? Can we do something that shows the freedom of the arm, the freedom of the mechanism? Secondly, can you take your other arm, your other hand, can you lift this arm off the key? If it's very easy to lift, this is really hard to do in isolation because the body likes to work together. But if it's very easy for the left hand to lift the arm up, then we're only putting in enough pressure on the key bed to hold the key down. It's very easy to lift up. If we continue to push down, it's going to be very hard for the other hand to lift the arm up, right? And this is one very difficult thing to accomplish in practice. Even if we talk about a very natural way of employing arm weight to play, which is simply letting the weight of everything, if the shoulder's relaxed upon key strike, it's the weight of the arm that plays the key. The thing is, it's not the weight of the arm that continues to hold the key down, because the arm itself is quite heavy. If I was to play this with arm weight and then let the arm continue to fall, see if I can do that. That would happen. Because if I don't have structure somewhere else, there's going to be so much weight it's going to pull my hand off the key. So I need to maintain that structure, and I need to maintain the right tension. We always talk about tension as a bad thing, but I need to maintain the right amount of tension, holding the arm in a way that it's not tight and immobile, like this is tight and I can't do anything. I can't now move very easily. But if I can hold the key and keep the arm fluid, that's going to be great. So every key articulation, we want that to happen. Going back to the scale. That's basically a triplet pattern. Long, short, long, short, long, short. Do that detached. Do that. Do it legato. Let's make the rhythm grouping shorter. So really precise. Dotted 8th and 16th. So feeling 4 subdivisions. Do that also detached. I find that detached helps the most with triggering that relaxation that we need when we play legato. Legato is more difficult to achieve that. Also, Val, play out more. Simple as that. Feel free to play forte. Don't hold back your dynamic as you work on articulation. So all of this, I use a scale because we all know our scales. But in any piece of rep that you're playing, so if you said your fingers stumble, wherever that phrase is that you're stumbling on, employ this technique. Create some little dotted or triplet rhythmic groupings. Play it out more where we can sink in more. And that's going to start to work itself out. Yeah? Okay. Great question. Oh, let's see. I'm catching up. Yeah, you're welcome, Val. I hope that is helpful. Let us know. Feel free. We do these every 2 weeks. Come back in and let us know if you found it helpful or if you still have a question about it. I'm just going to go back to the top. I see more conversation about posture, and that's great. But let's go back. Ferris. Hello, Ferris. Ferris says, people say Hannon may help. Even you just play the first page and then give up. Yeah. Hannon is interesting. as pure exercises, I don't see the value of Hanon in the notes themselves. There's a little bit of an argument to be made that can you take any of the exercises and transpose them? That, I think, is an interesting approach to playing Hanon and to learning your way around the keyboard. The notes themselves aren't going to do anything more for us in Hanon than they will in playing our scales and arpeggios, and that they will if we have some other rep, like other exercise rep, like charity or something like that. The biggest problem that I have with Hanon, and this comes, I saw a snippet of Thomas down lower, yes. Faber Hanon instead of Hanon. The biggest problem that I have with Hanon, the original Hanon book, is the directions in it, which we've talked about a ton here. I'm not going to go into super detail again, but the directions, this relates to what we just talked about. The directions on page 1 to lift the fingers are horrible, horrible directions. It is the opposite of playing from a relaxed and tension-free perspective. We also need to remember that Hanon himself was an organist, not a pianist. Technique to play organ is very different than technique to play the modern piano. And ask any organist, they're going to tell you the same thing. And whatever instrument you spend more time on tends to influence the other one. So I've known a couple people in my life that are primarily organists, and they cannot break their organ technique when they come to piano because they don't play the piano as often. But they instantly realize when they sit down that it's not the correct thing for the instrument. Nancy says Hanon was the only technique your teacher taught. Now, the notes themselves, if they're approached from a healthy way, the only problem with Hanon is that it's not all that interesting. But if Hanon is approached in a healthy way, we can go through those exercises. There is also the Russian method, the Russian school. A lot of the highly advanced pianists still use Hanon, partially because there are written statements from Rachmaninoff citing Hanon as a source of his virtuosity. And the Russian school, I think, actually requires from some of the conservatories their students, high-level students, to go through Hanon at like 200 beats a minute. It's incredibly fast. Now, what Hanon will not teach you how to play Hanon at 200 beats per minute. You learn how to do that by doing other exercises and by really probably working with a good teacher. Because Hanon itself, I think the high tempo is marked as 120, which is about here. 200 would be something crazy fast. The technique to play that you will never discover by only playing Hanon. So, that's a couple of my 2 cents about Hanon. Thomas said Faber Hanon instead of Hanon. Yes, always yes, because we can use the very simple and repetitive exercises to work on fluidity and movement, which I think is super important. Super important. And if you have a great teacher that basically employs, it's the Taubman technique that is written about in that book. You can get away with just using your standard Hanon if you have a teacher that knows how to employ those types of movements while you work on the regular exercises. But if you're learning on your own, just get the Faber Hanon book. And you can watch some of my videos, and also Randall Faber himself recorded videos that demonstrate some of the process. So you can pick whoever resonates with you more and watch and see how the principles are employed using those exercises. Now, the point of always using an exercise to work on technique is that hopefully the notes are they're a piece of the puzzle that we simply don't have to think about anymore. So that's why I'm always talking about scales. I look to a scale to demonstrate something, because we probably all know our scales, or at least some of them, if not all of them. And we can instantly sit down and say, oh, I know the notes that go to that scale, so I don't have to think about the notes anymore. I just think about what I'm trying to execute and the change I'm trying to make. Yeah? And if we happen to have some rep that poses that sort of technical challenge, that's also, it can be a good place to look for that. My advice to students, though, usually is primarily let your technique be developed while you focus on it with your technical work for 15 minutes of your hour a day or 30 minutes of your 2 hours. Let that change how you approach the piano and let it, almost by osmosis, work its way into your rep. Because whenever we're playing rep, we should be listening with our ears and trying to be as musical as possible, not as worried about technique. Hopefully, the rep we're playing, we already have the technique built to accommodate 90% or more of it. Okay. I'm just going back up, make sure I didn't miss any questions. There's an interesting discussion about acoustic versus digital pianos. Love seeing that. Internet privacy advocate said tension is the enemy of good piano performance. 100%. 100%. The body can do amazing things when it's free and we employ it the way physics wants us to. And it's amazingly difficult to do things with the body when we try to fight physics. Internet privacy also said, spare me from hand and just practice Bach. Bach is great. It's great. We're gonna leave that there. Let's see, I'm gonna maybe go into a little bit back to the posture discussion because I'm seeing more and more comments about it. See, Nancy was correct in saying keep your body aligned over the seat bones or the sit bones so we can feel those in our bottom. Yeah, that's where we want to channel all of that weight through. Seth, I also saw your question about the distance the legs should be apart from one another. And that really depends on the level of repertoire you're playing and the demands of it. But I think you'll be able to see this. Yeah. So for any time I don't need to use the soft pedal, in which case my legs are going to be here. Right foot on damper pedal, left foot on soft pedal, una corda. They're pretty close together. The downside is if I need to lean very far in one direction or the other direction, I don't have a lot of balance. I have to do it all with core control, which is difficult. It's more difficult. It's possible, but more difficult. So if I don't need this foot close to the soft pedal for a particular passage, I'll move it away. And depending on how big the repertoire is, if it's really massive and I need a lot of power, the foot moves all the way out here to the side. And sometimes I'm even on my toes and it's a little kind of behind me and under the bench. So that's a good, 2 feet. The knees are about 2 feet apart from one another. So if I need to play some massive stuff, big chords, lots of movement, foot's going to be out here. If I'm playing Bach, like what we worked on earlier, I don't need that. My feet, I don't need that expansive range. I don't need that much power. I'm mostly playing from the shoulders down. I'm not using so much back. I don't need as much balance. I need balance. I don't need as much ability to shift balance around. And so I can play with the legs much, much closer together. Cool. Okay. Internet privacy said you saw this pianist Paul Parmalee break strings on a Bösendorfer. Yes. Let's see. I have not yet broken a string on a 9-footer. I have not yet done that. But I was notorious in college for breaking strings on all the practice pianos. The piano tech at the university was always on my case. Because I'd be practicing the Iran Sonata that I just played a little bit of, or Liszt or something, or a concerto for competition, and every day I'd pop something in the upper register every day. And that's funny. Ser Woolsley says Kissin playing Rock 3. Yep. Yeah, so it can happen. If the piano is in really good shape, it probably isn't going to happen, no matter how much power you put in. One of the stories I've heard, I came really close to having a chance to meet Van Cliburn. And one of the stories I've heard is that he had more power in his fingers than just about anybody else, maybe ever. And there's a friend of mine was in a kind of a conference room with him, and there's a big long wooden table, and he said Van Cliburn was making a point about something, and he just with his index finger came down on the table while he was making a point and talking with somebody, and the whole table shook because of the power in one finger. Not just a little vibration, but super resonant. And yet you don't hear about him breaking strings all that often. And Internet Privacy says, it's interesting that the string breaks and not the hammer or the hammer shank. Yeah. Hammer shanks usually have flexibility built in. So whether they're wood or carbon fiber, they have an amount that they're meant to flex upon strike. And so what happens is strings, as they get older, they lose their ability to stretch. The hammer shank, unless it's really dried out, if it's wooden and it's really dried out, it's not going to lose that ability to flex the way a string will. So that's what happens on a lot of pianos. If the strings haven't been replaced, or if they're kind of older, you'll hit something and you can feel it the instant you hit it, and the string doesn't give the way it should upon strike, and instead of giving and rebounding, it just splits apart. That almost always happens with older strings and not with newer strings. Oh, thank you so much, Christopher. I appreciate that. By the way, Christopher, while you're here, did you ever get my email? Because I tried to send you one, and I know we talked about this in the comments on another video, but I just want to, while we can actually chat, I want to make sure that you saw my email from December. Oh, let's see. I think, where was this question from? Gigi? Can't find it. Oh, okay, Gigi, there it is. Hello, Gigi. Can you recommend which Czerny to do? You've been playing the piano for 3 years and you do hand in regularly. Let me just read through some of the responses you got, Gigi. So Ser Woolsley said School of Velocity Opus 299. Or 849 if 299 is too difficult. I think that's pretty good. Gosh, I don't even have those on here. I should do a video on all of the different Czerny opuses and what they're valuable for. I think 299 is a good call, especially for 3 years in. It would be helpful, Gigi, if we knew what rep you were working on, because 3 years for two people could be very different things. Let me grab, I have one Czerny book on my bookshelf. Let me grab that, because it's one that I believe in more than some of the other ones. Okay. The book, the Czerny that I have most studied out of, and that begins with exercises that are, it depends on your level of sight reading, but they begin at about intermediate level, is Czerny's Opus 821. It's called 168 measure exercises. So it's nice because they're all pretty short. They all actually are kind of interesting. Let me just give you the first one or two. Not bad for sight reading. Number two. So those are interesting in that they're shorter and they're not so repetitive, and you still get to work on some really nice technical stuff. Seth, this is just a really old Alfred edition of these pieces. I don't think with Czerny you don't have to spend a lot of money on a great edition. They're mainly there just for the notes to go through. That said, Czerny does have some wonderful thoughts on Beethoven, but you're not going to find those in a book of his exercises. Gigi says you're doing grade 4 pieces at the moment. Yeah, you'll probably want to stick with $2.99 for the time. And maybe once you're grade 5 or 6 or thereabouts, yeah, this Opus 821 will be a good thing to dive into. There's a lot of scale technique, a lot of arpeggio technique. Also, right away, the book gets into exercises where you have to use rotation to get through them, which is really great. A lot of good stuff in the 8-measure exercises. And because they're only 8 bars, you can learn them pretty quickly. Yes, Bachward's Fellow says Czerny on IMSLP. It should be on there. All right. I think I missed Julio signing off, but if Julio's still here, thanks for being here, Julio. Let's see. Thomas says, if you're not familiar with Czerny, if someone is a beginner and perhaps working on Faber-Hanon rather than Hanon, would you recommend any Czerny? No, probably not. Simply, if your technical exercises for your short time every day are limited to your scales, we have to learn the theory behind scales. And we should also be spending some time working on ear training for chords, chord technique, things like that. Can you, very, very basic example, can you play your cadence pattern? 1, 4, 1, 5, 7, 1. Can we play it in a bigger sense if you're more advanced? Can we do that in multiple keys other than just C? Can you play it in all the inversions? Of course, right? That's really important. Can we go through arpeggios in root position and our inversions? We should be pretty fluent with that kind of stuff before we'd even need to dive into working on Czerny. So Czerny's going to give us examples where, especially like in this Opus 821, we're going to be able to work on our scalar technique and our arpeggio technique in some really easily digestible notes. And it's more musical than Hanon, for sure. It's still not as great as some standalone repertoire, but because they're so short, this just makes it really quick to get into that stuff. Thank you, Bedlington Groomer. I appreciate that. Let's see. Nancy says, in your 1 year of relearning, you can play Satie's Gymnopédie number 1, and you're proud of yourself. That's great. That's a beautiful, beautiful piece of music. And Nancy, were you here at the beginning of today? Earlier today, we heard Ser Woolsley play a beautiful piece of Bach, and it was about a year ago maybe a year and a half, Ser Woolsley was playing that same piece. And it was a stretch. So much progress in a year. And Nancy, you can do the same thing too. Let's see, Nancy, you say you found a book at a used bookstore called Hand Equalization Studies, based on the Etudes of Czerny. Interesting. You know, for very early exercise study for technical development, so this would be like, beginner, late beginner type stuff. There is a series of books called Finger Power, which are pretty good. And we could say, just from looking at them, I think they are very loosely based on some of the stuff that Czerny employs in the exercises he writes. But it's in a very accessible way. So if we're early on in our study, Finger Power, I can't remember, it might be published by Schaum. Those are pretty good books. When I was very young, I did a couple of those. And I have a couple students that work through some of the exercises in there as well. And it's, again, I choose those for them because they are simple enough to learn the notes to. So we don't want to spend a lot of time learning notes to go through a technical exercise. We want it to be like almost immediate. So Sir Woolsley said, leave a like if you can. Yeah, please hit the thumbs up button. Absolutely. Thanks, Sir Woolsley. And thanks, Jess. I don't think I skipped any questions. Let me know if I missed something. I'm happy to go back and answer anything else. Bachward's Fellow, I guess you had that question. I wrote you a comment back, but I can talk about that real quick if you'd like me to talk about it. Let me know, Bachward's Fellow, do you want me to talk about the scale stuff that you left me a comment about? There was Bachward's. And if yes, we'll do that, and that'll probably be the last thing we talk about today, because it's already, my goodness, 2 hours and 7 minutes. We've already been doing this so long. So the time flies when you have so much fun. Let me give you a quick update on while Bachward's Fellow says that. Samantha, leave your question. Depending on how long the answer is, I'll either answer it now or we'll talk about it next time. Coming up on the channel, there are a bunch of new videos finally coming out. Let's see, what have I filmed recently? Hopefully I'm going to get one out by this Friday. I'm going to do a video discussing a little bit on ways of dealing with when you find your teacher's piano more difficult to play than the instrument you practice on at home. I have a video coming out about how important it is for performers of piano to learn about composition. That'll be very interesting. There was a third one I just filmed, and I can't remember. I can't remember the title. But those two are coming up. So you'll have those to look forward to. Oh, the third one. I came up with 7 things that I think separate intermediate level pianists from beginners. And it has nothing to do with repertoire. That's usually how we always talk about levels, is what repertoire defines what level you're on. And I think that has actually relatively little to do with what level you've achieved and you've attained. So there'll be a video coming up about that as well. Okay, so let's see. Let's go back. Bachward's Fellow, you said how to center over black notes after crossing thumb. So Bachward's Fellow, do you mean like in a B major scale? For example, if we cross the thumb under, and then we need the fingers to be instantly ready to play F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, something like that. I can go into that. Let's talk about, seems to require very slow practicing to get all 3 fingers over. And you say like in D flat major, B major, F sharp major. Okay. Great. Let me show you top down. Yes, do some slow practice. But first and foremost, let's talk about if we're in B. When the thumb cross happens, if we're going very slow, don't even think about tucking the thumb at all. Don't pull it under the hand, because as soon as we pull it under the hand like this, we're putting the thumb under tension. So let's make sure we practice the creation of tension with the release. So if we go very slowly, the thumb doesn't tuck until it needs to. Now the other thing we can practice while we do this, once the thumb plays, can we throw the other 3 fingers, the next 3 in this case for B, they should be thrown onto the tops of the next 3 notes that we need. Same thing in D flat, cross to thumb. So in both of these cases, as soon as the thumb plays, the next 3 are perfectly ready to go. And then the next 2, B back to B. So the act of crossing the thumb is paired with the throw of the hand into the next position, going up. So you can tackle that very slowly. Throw your fingers to the next position, but don't play. They should just hover over those keys. Yes? Internet Privacy said, fingers or the hand follow the arm. Yes, if we think about when we're a little bit more advanced, the arm should be, and this would be if we're practicing scales at a faster tempo, or we need to play a passage at a faster tempo. The arm is, in a sense, I like to feel that it pulls the hand with you in the direction that it needs to go. But that's going to be way more advanced than simply learning how to get the fingers in the right position upon crossing of the thumb. Because what we're talking about here is there's almost no arm movement involved in the cross between 3 and 1. There's very little. There's more going from 4 up. Yes? Seth says, is it possible to show the throw part by itself? Let's see. Okay, don't do this in practice, but to show, here I'm hovering over 3 on D sharp, thumb is ready to play the E that you can't see, it's under the hand. Okay? So as soon as the thumb would go down, the hand shifts from here to here. So the notes are ready, D sharp, E is ready. As soon as E plays, hand shifts. It's this kind of movement with the thumb as a pivot point. Now subsequently, it's more complicated than this, because when we actually play, and Internet Privacy says you see quite a bit of arm movement. There is that built in because I've done all of the practice necessary to get there. But if we isolate the individual components, when 3 is playing, yes, the arm is going to be more like this. It's going to be centered behind 3. It's going to be in line. And as soon as the thumb plays, the arm shifts. But the thing is, if we feel the movement with the arm, our fingers aren't going to be anywhere where we need to be. They're just going to kind of flop around, and they're not going to be in the right place. If I focus on arm only, every time I've done this, the fingers are not in the correct place to play the rest of the passage. So if we first start by maybe play D sharp, and then when in the new arm position, and then when we play E, the arm doesn't have to shift, but the fingers throw. 3, 1, and throw. And then more advanced than that is, after we play 3, during the cross to 1, the arm shifts and the fingers throw. Yeah? I hope that answers that question. That was Seth. Yes. Thanks, Seth. Okay, I'm just going back through the chat and making sure I didn't miss anything. Backwards fellow, yeah. The thumb tuck, there's a whole nother component of this, of scalar passages that I didn't even get into. So this works for slow practice, and as we try to play faster and faster and more virtuosically, there's rotation involved in getting the thumb under the hand, how that works, and how the fingers cross over the hand. The wrist is almost never flat. The top of the hand is almost never flat as we go up and down the keyboard. It's moving in subtle ways to accommodate what the fingers need to do. We want the fingers to move themselves. We want them to move less distance. So when I thumb tuck, I'll give you a quick example, but this isn't going to be something you practice right away. When the thumb actually tucks, the hand is slightly rotated toward the fifth finger. Because as soon as I do that, now the thumb can almost drop into E instead of having to tuck it at all. So the more we can minimize, once again, this is a lot of tension. That's a lot of tension right here. To play and release quickly and easily is very difficult. But if we only need to tuck the thumb to here, that's a lot less tension from here to here instead of here to here. Whole lot less. And we do that by letting the top of the wrist, it rotates. When the thumb is now relaxed, I can almost drop in on E and shift. That's more advanced. That's getting into how to increase the speed of your scales once we can accommodate the rest of the technique. Internet privacy says movement should be natural. And Yuja hardly practice exercises. I bet that's true of Yuja. But I have had so many students that have never had a teacher teach technique, and they can't play their rep. They simply can't get through it because they've never actually thought about it. I would say 99% of people, it does not come like breathing. If it comes to you like breathing, you are exceptionally gifted. And it does come to some people like that, like Yuja. When I was younger, and this is something I've talked about on the channel before, and this is going to be part of one of the coming videos, I had horrible technique. I was pushing through, powering through, playing Chopin and some other stuff, but it was all coming from the wrong place. My teacher never addressed it. They didn't even know it wasn't good until I changed to work with someone who really could understand what I was doing and how to fix it. And everything that I thought about approaching the piano, I had to unlearn it all. And I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to do that when I was only 12. But sometimes I get students, they're very gifted, and they're 16, 17 years old, and they want to apply for a collegiate program. And they come with the same types of issues that I had when I was younger. And it takes so much time and so much slowing things down to undo, because it never worked like breathing for those people. It never came naturally. What they assumed to do was prohibiting them from actually playing the way they wanted to. And until they had someone tell them on the outside, it just never changed. That is one of the things that I think, somebody that plays like Yuja, who's played since she was a very, very young person, any pianist that's a prodigy, gosh, no, they probably had very little attention to technique because they were so naturally gifted. But it's just not very common. If I even think about people I went to school with who have had master's degrees and doctorate degrees, a lot of them even still have technical struggles, even after their 3 degrees, because things weren't addressed early enough in their life and they built too many bad habits and they never knew to incorrect them. You say some people are just plain awkward. I would say most people are just plain awkward. Okay. I would have to listen to some Jeremy Dank. I haven't listened to him play in a long time. So I can't answer that. I'll go listen to something. I'll search them and just pull up a couple different albums. Okay, we're gonna call it a day. We've been on 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's been a fantastic session. Samantha, I didn't. Samantha, you said arm level gives more weight, more momentum. Arm level touch. Yes, I'll agree with that. Samantha, you said you had a question. If you're still here, be sure, and we do these things every 2 weeks, or about every 2 weeks, the second Wednesday and the fourth Wednesday of the month. Okay, so Samantha, if you've got a question, please tune in next time, or even leave it as a comment below this video, and I'll talk about it next time. Absolutely, because I'd love to hear what you're thinking and what you want to discuss. Absolutely. Thank you to everybody for being here. If you haven't clicked that thumbs up button, please click the thumbs up button. Helps out a lot. And if you have music that you're working on that you would like to submit for the masterclass portion, like we started today off with, there's a little bit of a description about how to do that below the video right here. So you can check that out and you can always submit. Beautiful. Okay. Thanks everybody for being here. Happy New Year. We had a great time. First stream of 2024. I will hopefully see all of you in 2 weeks, whatever date that happens to be, the 24th. Thanks, Ser Woolsley, for sending in a wonderful performance. If Dith is still here, thanks, Dith, as well, sending in a wonderful performance. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Bedlington Groomer, Thomas, Internet Privacy Advocate, Bachwards Fellow, Samantha. I know we had Jess here earlier, a whole bunch of other people. Thank you for being here. Practice smarter, not harder. And I will see you next time, 2 weeks, or if you find any other videos you want to watch. Okay, everybody, have a great rest of your week, and I hope you have a wonderful year to come. I'll see you all next time.